While Out of the Park Baseball looks like an Excel spreadsheet for baseball nerds, there is so much more under that often unintuitive surface. Stories spring from the screen as you watch players develop, thrive, crash, and succeed. Your heart thumps as you pray that this time, this year, it finally will all come together. Your eyes roll as your owner demands that you re-sign an over-the-hill 40-year-old player to a multi-year contract. Your teeth clench just a little when your ace gets injured in September. And yes, it is also an Excel spreadsheet for baseball nerds. There are many numbers, but for both rookies and veterans of out-of-the-park baseball, they have meaning. A 300 average, 20 wins, 60 home runs, a 1.12 ERA, gold gloves and gurus beckoning your players with their siren songs, the thrill of player development for that A1 prospect, the heartache of seeing your 37-year-old lifer finally showing signs of his age and regressing by just a hair, inexorably losing a tick on his fastball or a pace in his step. You create the stories in Out of the Park Baseball, the images in your mind's eye behind the numbers. And at the same time, you're trying to win games. The game is as addicting as they come, with a wealth of depth that few, if any, other simulation games possess. I have spent easily 1,000 hours chasing down that pitcher with a surprisingly high contact rating, or that unusually talented Rule 5 draft pick. How does a seemingly simple spreadsheet with logos and computer-generated pictures hold such sway over someone? Where did Out of the Park Baseball come from? And why, in my opinion, is this the greatest sports simulation game ever made? Well, let's talk about it. When I was little, the baseball games that I had access to could not simulate seasons, or if they could, they couldn't simulate them well at all. Games on the Super Nintendo almost never could save your season or progress, and the ones that I had definitely could not save your stats. However, I was aware of an in-depth baseball simulation game that could simulate a season pitch by pitch. That game is one that my father would play in one of his rare moments of rest. Stratomatic. I don't think it's a stretch to say that when it comes to PC games, Out of the Park Baseball is a Stratomatic player's dream. In fact, the creator of Out of the Park Baseball himself, Marcus Heinsohn, played one of the earliest computer games that, as the New York Times describes it, is a descendant of Stratomatic, Diamond Mind. Diamond Mind is also very similar to another baseball simulation game known as Pursue the Pennant. Heinsohn, a German who had learned to code as a child and became a baseball fan at 14, was dismayed at playing Diamond Mind. According to the New York Times, he was upset that the game could not realistically simulate real baseball statistics. When you were simulating a season, you would have pitchers with a 0.30 ERA and hitters hitting like 80 home runs, he told the Times. In a Reddit AMA, or Ask Me Anything, Heinsohn wrote, quote, "I hated the fact that my Diamond Mind baseball game ended after the season was over. I wanted a career game, not a replay one. Unfortunately, there was nothing serious available back then, so I decided to develop it on my own during my studies. A year and a half later, OOTP 1999 was released." End quote. The name for the game came to Heinsohn while watching a baseball game, according to the New York Times. Someone had just hit a home run, and the announcer said that they had hit it out of the park. The focus for Heinsohn, and still is the focus of the game to this day, was the ability to simulate any imaginable baseball scenario realistically. First sold online as a link, Out of the Park Baseball's popularity slowly grew until dozens of copies were being sent out via mail every week. Heinsohn's team expanded, and so too did the game's popularity until it was sold in 2005 to Sports Interactive. The game continues to be developed in yearly iterations. Interestingly, it wasn't until 2015 that Out of the Park Baseball received the MLB license, where they were allowed to use real players' names and logos. Not coincidentally, that is the same year that I got into Out of the Park Baseball really for the first time. For me, there's always so much more of a pull when you see real players and real logos and actual locations, and I feel so too is that true for the average baseball fan or football fan as Out of the Park Baseball continues to grow. A game, for example, that I wish I could have gotten into, but I didn't really because it didn't have an official license, was 2K8 All-Pro Football. Legendary players were in that game, but unfortunately, all of the teams and the logos were created specifically for that game. Other than acquiring the MLB license, since its early iterations, Out of the Park Baseball has reworked its code and added a tremendous amount of new features. Team chemistry, simulating games with three-dimensional representations of players, league and playoff customization options, and international leagues, just to name a few. Actual professional baseball players and sports writers have also commented on their love for the game. This includes former All-Star relievers Jeff Montgomery and Pat Neshek. On Reddit, the subreddit OOTP has eclipsed 31,000 subscribers and continues to grow. If you have ever played Out of the Park Baseball and want to laugh at its occasional absurdity, I highly suggest that you give that community a look. Sadly, the latest version of Out of the Park Baseball, OOTP 25, is the last iteration that Mr. Heinsohn was the CEO and managing director. In a message posted to the Out of the Park forums, he stated, quote, "I still remember the early days, writing the first lines of OOTP code back in 1997, tucked away in my tiny 90-square-foot dorm room. The first launch in 1999, pulling all-nighters to fix bugs, getting excited over every new feature idea, and eagerly reading your feedback on the forums after each launch. It was an incredible time. Over the years, your passion, suggestions, and critiques have been the driving force behind OOTP's evolution. Together, we've taken this game to a level I never thought possible." End quote. But let's say you're a new player. Where do you start and how do you continue? Let's take a look at the UI of modern iterations of Out of the Park Baseball. The user interface of Out of the Park Baseball is a test of memory. Accessing key information about your health, your budget, your player development are not easy to find unless you pretty much have memorized exactly what buttons to click and where to scroll on a menu. I don't remember specifically the first time I tried Out of the Park Baseball, but I remember that I was completely overwhelmed by the information that hit me square in the face. I remember staring at a list of players with more than a dozen attributes each and having absolutely no idea where to start. Because of this, I remember playing for maybe half an hour and then not touching the game for several years. For years after, though, I would occasionally think about Out of the Park Baseball. I often use Metacritic when I'm looking for new games to play, and I remember Out of the Park Baseball 2007 being the second highest rated PC game of all time with a 96 out of 100. That ranking has since been removed, but it stuck in my mind at that time. I returned to the game over the holiday break in 2015 after seeing that Out of the Park Baseball had acquired the license to use real player and team names. With some time on my hands, I gave Out of the Park Baseball another chance and dedicated myself to learning its mechanics. This time, the game got its hooks in me and has not let go since. But the fact remains, the UI is likely the biggest barrier to new players. That said, as you go through and learn the menus, there's an absolute wealth of information. Stats, contracts, budgets, development costs, scouting, and so much more. The game predicts how teams and players will do at the end of every spring training, and every July it will show you tabulated votes for the All-Star race. It is a statistician's and sabermetrician's dream. Also, I cannot encourage new players enough to turn on Face Gen. Putting a face with a name brings life to numbers. It's also kind of funny to see players when they are super happy or super sad, or who are super sad but they're trying to hide their pain. But after learning how to get the information you want, and even as you're trying to learn, you are also trying to win baseball games.
I wouldn't live without you. Kiss you are the only.
There are so many turning gears in Out of the Park Baseball that it's tough to decide where to start when it comes to strategy. It also depends on what team you're going to start with. Obviously, the 2024 White Sox are going to be a completely different experience than the 2024 Dodgers, and so on. The strategies that I employ are not always the best ones either, and even if things are perfectly planned, oftentimes those plans go awry. But that's one of the most addictive facets of Out of the Park Baseball. When you win it all, it will feel extremely earned. You do not win a World Series by luck. Luck is the residue of design. I always play in challenge mode, so I'm not tempted to change an unfortunate outcome or undo an injury. That said, I do turn off suspensions because it's not my fault that my star rookie charged the mound on opening day and got into a fistfight with the rally monkey. The first thing that I do is look at my budget. Who is earning the most salary? Who deserves it? Am I in a deficit or surplus? And what can I do about it? I also tend to play as smaller teams that aren't great because I enjoy a challenge. Keep in mind, the better your team does, the more resources you will have and the higher your budget might go in future seasons. Fan loyalty and market size have a large impact on the flexibility your team has monetarily as well. I'm going to run through some early game strategies that I use. These might not be the greatest ideas ever, but they are ones that have worked for me in the past. When it comes to starting with bad teams, I always try to immediately offload expensive players. Talented players who earn a good deal of money can be flipped for nearly equal players with a much lower salary, or prospects who are not major league tested but have the numbers to make an impact. I never tank a season, as the drop in my budget would make me lose a great deal of my ability to maneuver. Therefore, making good trades are easily the most important actions of your first season or two. Potentially, you can also pair your decently talented trading chips with a few scrubs from the minors to sweeten the pot for the computer. When making these types of trades, my main focus is finding a player who fills a need, is young, and is team controlled for several years. In other words, someone who has a multi year contract instead of a rental. All this, of course, is easier said than done, and you could spend scores of minutes fine tuning several trades only to see potential evaporate or a player break their leg. Much tougher to move are players who make a lot of money but are terrible, i.e., a Chris Davis contract. This might not be the best strategy, but I do pretty much everything in my power to deal those players away immediately, even if I have to eat some of their salary. They're wasting space, I'm on the hook anyway, and if I pair them with some middling prospects to get another team to take some of their salary, I'll do that every time. You've now traded some of your most expensive players and hopefully whittled down your budget. So, what's next? Well, it all depends. Are all the gaps in your team as filled as possible? If not, try to trade for more players. Maybe another team is desperate for your second baseman and you can fill two needs by trading that one player. Like real life, the beauty of out-of-the-park baseball is that there are many correct answers. But also like real life, there are many very wrong answers. Experience and mistakes are your best teacher. Even with an unlimited budget, you are never guaranteed anything, especially if you make mistakes. This is magnified fivefold with a poor team and middling talent. Sure, that 34-year-old first baseman might fill a need for a season or two, but a hefty 5 or 6 year contract could be devastating down the road. Strategically, if a talented player is in their last season with my team, I often make the difficult decision to trade them if an extension can't be reached near the beginning of the season. And that even includes if I'm making a playoff push. I try to flip them for a talented younger player with years of team control available. I personally never buy at the trade deadline either, unless someone's been injured. But again, that's all personal preference. Another key component to a successful team is scouting and development. Having more money in both departments is paramount, as inaccurate reports can lead to devastating effects, and a mediocre farm system produces no homegrown talent. Keep a keen eye on personnel ratings, and if you can, always try to get a scout that favors tools. Along with scouts that you can hire are coaches. The rating of both dramatically affect how much a player develops, how accurate scouting reports are, and how effective players perform. Additionally, team morale and player personalities must be taken into account. For example, on my team, I will never bring a disruptive player into my team unless there are several leaders there already. More than one such player is asking for trouble regardless of talent. It doesn't matter the circumstances for me, I will not allow that on any team. Defense is also extremely important. A team of well-hitting DHs will still do poorly if none of them can play the field. Defensive ratings also vary in importance by player. The range of a center fielder and shortstop is extremely important, while the arm strength of a first baseman is not. Catcher ability is also exceptionally important, not only for their defensive acumen, but for their ability to help their pitchers. The ERA of an entire staff can drop precipitously with a talented player behind home plate. All these circumstances intertwined, often working in tandem or against one another, leads to fun and addicting gameplay. My favorite time in the season is actually the off-season, where anything is possible. Trades fly, negotiations take place for free agents, and the Rule 5 draft gives you the chance to find a diamond in the rough. I'm not going to go through every aspect of gameplay through every form of strategy, but suffice it to say that out-of-the-park baseball is not wanting for depth. Now, let's take a look at the players that populate Out of the Park. Naturally, in a baseball simulation game, The most important variable are the players themselves. As I mentioned in a previous segment, there are attributes for each player, but also personality traits. As you might imagine, in general, higher numbers are good and lower numbers are bad. I tend to do the 20/80 scouting report, which is apparently what is used in Major League Baseball itself. 50 on that scale is average, with numbers increasing or decreasing by 5, so 50, 55, 60, etc. Some players use stars, others use 1 to 100, and nobody is wrong and nobody is right. Legitimately, so long as you are enjoying the game, that's all that matters.
Depending on the position, there are more consequential factors than others. Obviously, you want all players to be able to get on base, but you want to achieve that through contact, walks, or a combination of the two. Obviously, you want players to be able to drive in runs. However, do you go for a player with mediocre contact but huge power, or a player with good contact and only decent power? It really all depends on you and what you're looking for in a player and your strategy. I like to keep an eye closely on base running ability as well. If two players are very similar, but one has a noticeably better base running ability, that can produce a couple extra runs a season. If you have 5 players that have very good base running ability, that could be 10 to 15 runs a season, which could mean a place on the couch in October or a wild card game. On top of that, other than the DH, defense is integral. When I first started playing out of the park baseball, all I cared about is contact and power. I very quickly learned that a team that could not play the field could not prevent enough runs to win a baseball game consistently. You also need to be cognizant of which ratings are the best for which position. Arm strength is paramount for right fielders throwing to third base and shortstops throwing to first base. Center fielders must have tremendous range because they have the most ground to cover in the outfield. First basemen are the least important defensively so long as their first base rating is good. Then again, it never hurts to have a plus defender on a corner. Injury ratings are important to take into account as well. Durable and Iron Man players are always vastly more valuable than their glass-boned brethren. During a normal playthrough, I trade any fragile pitchers, no matter their ratings, unless it is the first year of the game and I literally cannot trade for anyone of value. Their injury proneness doesn't seem to terribly affect their trade value, and they are one major injury away from losing it all, let alone being injured during the season and not contributing. In fact, the only fragile players I allow on my team are DHs and first basemen, as they are dramatically less likely to be hurt compared to other positions.
Team chemistry is also partially determined by player personalities. Obviously, winning solves most issues, but if you have a team that's talented but gets off to a rough start, they might end up playing much worse because of the big personalities on your team. In my opinion, at least 2 or 3 leaders on a team is a must-have in order to control your clubhouse. Captains and spark plugs can push your teams through hard times or keep them on their toes during good ones. And without exaggerating, 98% of the time that I have someone with a disruptive personality on my team, I immediately trade them away. It can be tough to part with a player who has given your team his all for an entire decade or more. Yes, they're only pixels on the screen, but it's tough to not want an over-the-hill former superstar to reach that next milestone that he so rightly deserves, even if it hurts your team just a little bit.
Once again, the allure of out-of-the-park baseball is how many different solutions there are to the same problem. How do you win baseball games? High contact and speed are not necessarily better or worse than good fielding and power. And maybe getting away with one bad hitter here and one bad defender there won't do too much damage. Or maybe they will drop a fly ball in the 5th inning of a World Series game and turn the tide of the entire playoff picture. Speaking of which, now is a good time to talk about the output of your players and the statistics the game calculates.
I've been a baseball fan for as long as I can remember. Unfortunately, God saw to it to make me a Mets fan. But as any die-hard fan can tell you, certain numbers and dates elicit a certain feeling that never quite has the same gravity when it comes to other sports. A good example is the number 714 or 755. If you're a baseball fan, I don't need to tell you what those numbers mean, but you immediately know their significance. The number 42, the number 300, the number 3000, the number 4256. As a nerd who loves statistics, baseball, along with its other mesmerizing traits, has always scratched a certain part of my brain.
In fact, one of the reasons why Marcus Heinsohn, the creator of Out-of-the-Park Baseball, fell in love with America's pastime was because of statistics. He told the New York Times, quote, "Soccer in Germany, they only keep track of goals, just no statistical culture at all. Baseball was full of statistics and numbers, and I became hooked," end quote. This love of numbers is evident in how the game is designed. Seasons of grandeur with low ERAs and immaculate games still have a sense of wonder. At the end of a career, when I see my favorite pitcher who had 15 wins 10 years in a row, I often marvel at his durability. And when I look at the consistency of Hank Aaron when I go to baseballreference.com, I feel a connection between one of the greatest players to ever live and a fictional player who is an echo of reality. This is, of course, not to say that a fictional player is the equivalent of a real player, and it's not to say that any other sports are better or worse than baseball. This is entirely my personal opinion. It is also an effect of how well out-of-the-park baseball simulates the game. In fact, on that note, let's talk about how realistic out-of-the-park baseball is.
Softball, from Maine to San Diego, talk softball, Mattingly and Canseco.
One of the great things that sets out-of-the-park baseball apart from its contemporaries is simply how accurately and realistically it simulates baseball. In the late 90s, I was really into a baseball game called Hardball 5 that would only work if you went through DOS to boot the program. Then, as a teenager, I really got into a game called Baseball Mogul way before I had ever heard of out-of-the-park baseball. The Baseball Mogul version that I really got into as a teenager was Baseball Mogul 2007. And at that time, it was by far the most realistic baseball simulation game I had ever played. But it also had a number of tremendous exploits that I took full advantage of. For example, every season I made a massive amount of money, and every few years I would build a brand new 100,000 person stadium. Because it was a brand new stadium, it would drive more attendance, thus allowing me to sell it out constantly for every game of the season. On my most successful playthrough ever on Baseball Mogul 2007, over the course of 30 years, I won 29 World Series. I had players win more games than Cy Young, hit over 1,000 home runs in their career, And one season, I won 156 games.
In Out of the Park Baseball, runs like this are impossible as a whole. Just like in real life, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Injuries, regressions, coaches, and team chemistry can all cause players to fade or play worse, and teams simply do not win 50 or more games in a row. But even that is an extreme of an extreme. Lengthy win streaks are very rare in out-of-the-park baseball, even among the best teams. This, of course, mirrors real teams in Major League Baseball. You can't expect to win every single game, and often the teams you expect to steamroll are able to eke out a win or two in a pivotal series. And let's be honest here, there's gotta be a code somewhere that a dramatically worse team than your own must crush your dreams at least 3 or 4 times every playthrough. It's also part of the reason why the statistics I talked about in the last segment still hold weight when you're playing out-of-the-park baseball. Those careers of 600 or 700 home runs are very, very rare. Batting 400 in a season, while not impossible, is an extreme rarity as well. So too is it difficult for a pitcher to achieve a 20-win season or a sub-3 ERA as a starter. Injuries are also very prevalent in Out of the Park. If you hate them, it behooves you to always get the best medical trainer possible. I tend to try to get ones with better injury prevention, but that's not always available. Also, there are events that cause players to retire on the spot. This does not always include injuries, however. I've never run into an event where someone retires because of changing sports or becoming a missionary, and I hope I never do. The amount of injuries are also changeable, but I tend to leave it at its default. When it comes to other mainstream sports simulation games, they simply do not hold a candle to the accuracy of out-of-the-park baseball. There's a reason every year that people laugh when Madden simulates the playoffs that year. In the hundreds and hundreds of hours that I have played Madden in my lifetime, I have always found the computer a poor substitute for reality or playing every down. In more recent Maddens, for example, despite having superstars or X-Factors galore on defense, I regularly see in simulated games that my opponent scores 30, 40, or 50 points. It often feels as if the computer is not taking into account the collective of players on either side of the ball, unaware that an ROLB might pressure a quarterback into a bad throw, or a wide receiver might pull 2 defenders, leaving the tight end open. The same is true in my experience with 2K and MLB The Show when it comes to simulating games, even though I have spent hundreds of hours devoted to those series as well.
That's not to say that out-of-the-park baseball does every single thing other games can. When I'm playing out-of-the-park baseball, I'm not physically controlling an athlete on the field like in College Football 25 or FIFA. You get a similar, though distinct, feeling when you crush a game-winning home run in MLB The Show than when you simulate a game in Out of the Park. But being different does not mean bad, it just means exactly that. Different. If you prefer twitch reflexes and don't really care about stats, then this is probably not the game for you. And there's no shame in that. Through a combination of sandbox gameplay, verisimilitude, depth, and realistic outcomes and challenges, there is no other game quite like out-of-the-park baseball in existence. Through many years of tweaking and adding, the game simply gets better. I would argue that out-of-the-park baseball is the greatest sports simulation gaming series ever created. There are Madden and 2K, Football Manager, and MLB The Show. All of them are great series, though maybe a few have their glory days behind them. But for addictiveness, accuracy, and depth, Out of the Park Baseball stands alone. The thousands of hours that I have sunk into this Excel spreadsheet are hours well spent, with movies played in the background or while my wife and I watch an episode of reality TV. They are days that I look back at fondly, and they are moments in the future that I plan to savor. So, what do you think about Out of the Park Baseball? Are there better sports simulation games on the market? Which one was your first? Please, let me know. And most importantly, thank you so much for watching.